This is a car made by Infiniti, and it's probably a car company you've never heard of. Infiniti is the posh arm of Nissan. It's what Lexus is to Toyota, but over the past 6 years it hasn't exactly been an overwhelming success.
Last year, for instance, was the best year Infiniti has ever had in the UK. So how many cars do you think they sold then? 50,000? 100,000? No. 1,200. 1,200 cars, 200 fewer than Bentley managed.
Up to now though, Infiniti's 12 UK dealerships have been selling cars with big V6 and V8 engines designed not for we Brits, but primarily for the Americans.
But this could finally be the car that gets people interested in Infiniti. It's called the Q30 and it goes up against the big boys, the likes of the BMW 1 Series, the Audi A3, the Mercedes A-Class and the Volvo V40.
But there's no way you could describe this as a sheep because look at it. It's a mixture of bulges and creases and flowing and swooping lines. Conservative it isn't. But we've been here before though. All Infinitis, if you can remember, all look different from their rivals, have all forged their own paths, and that's done them no favours.
Which is why for the Q30, Infiniti has collaborated with the Germans. You see, underneath this car, it's based almost entirely on one of its biggest rivals, the Mercedes A-Class. It's not just the platform the Q30 has nicked from Mercedes either. Look at these seats, the air conditioning controls, the steering wheel, the electric window switches, the TFT screen in between the dials and the key. Look familiar? It's the A-Class again. But whilst it's easy to criticise the Q30, it's better than the cheap Nissan switchgear you tend to get in other Infiniti models. And the design is very nice too. Look at the way the dashboard swoops round. It's all very good quality in here. It's not quite as good as an Audi A3, but it's screwed together really well. You see, the Q30 is British made. It's built by the same people who build Nissan Qashqais and Dukes in Sunderland.
There's a Q30 to suit most needs, as there's 6 trim levels to choose from, with all models coming with air conditioning, autonomous emergency city braking, 7 airbags and 18-inch alloys. There's a long options list too, which includes a 360-degree parking camera, purple pinstriped alloys and blind spot warning. Storage-wise, there's a couple of cup holders, the glove box is large enough for a big bag of crisps, and the door bins can swallow bags of sweets and pass the Carbuyer big bottle test.
There's not much good news back here though. If I sit upright and the person in front of me is a 6-foot driver, for instance, there's not a huge amount of knee room. I've only got that much space. And if I sit properly upright, my head is banging right up against the corner of the ceiling. There's more bad news as well. Even though there's a third seat belt, there isn't actually anywhere for somebody to put their bottom. And if I sit in the middle, it's very uncomfortable and there's no headroom whatsoever. In this particular trim, it's very claustrophobic due to the black Alcantara roof lining and the black seats. And there's also no armrest, so I can't even rest my arm here if I want to get comfortable. However, there are isofix points here, isofix points here. There's some netting back here to store maps, for instance, and there's a 12-volt socket to charge things. Now, a cramped rear equals quite a good boot actually. Now, if I lift the tailgate up, you'll see that the boot space is actually quite square and quite large. It's actually on par with the Q30's rivals. Now, if I take out my large suitcase, you could fit 2 of these quite easily in there. And the Carbuyer umbrella, I've actually got quite a good amount of underfloor boot storage. There's some tie down points, another 12-volt socket, and the seats actually fold down almost completely flat, which is very useful, giving yourself some extra boot room.
There's a little more Mercedes borrowing too when it comes to the engines. There's a 208 brake horsepower 2-litre turbo petrol and 167 brake horsepower 2.1-litre diesel, both from Mercedes. To add something else to the cocktail, lower down the range, there's also 120 brake horsepower 1.6-litre turbo petrol and 108 brake horsepower 1.5-litre diesel from the Nissan Qashqai and Renault Kadjar.
Now, it's the 2.1 diesel we've got here, which for some strange reason is badged to 2.2D. But anyway, it's a 2.1 diesel with all-wheel drive, and with 168 brake horsepower, it gets from 0 to 60 in 8.5 seconds. Now that is a second and a half slower than a BMW 120D xDrive, but in the real world, the Q30 seems to be pretty brisk, easily on par with the 1 Series. And in actual fact, the Q30 is a little bit quieter than the 1 Series too. Higher spec models like this one have clever noise cancellation software which is pumped through the speaker system.
The better engine is the 1.5 though. While it does require a bit of effort to get it moving, it's the engine that you should really consider because it gives the best blend of refinement and fuel economy. Claimed MPG is in the high 60s and CO2 is around 108 grams per kilometre, which is pretty good.
Now I'd also go for the slick 7-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox because the 6-speed manual is a little bit notchy, and you really do need to have a burning desire to have all-wheel drive because even though it's grippy, there is a negative impact on fuel economy and CO2 emissions.
Top spec sport versions like we have here get racier styling, a 15mm drop in ride height, 7% stiffer springs and run flat tyres. But it's no hot hatch. In fact, the Q30 is quite a way off the BMW 1 Series for fun.
Now for pure comfort, it's probably better if you stick to other Q30 models in the range because they ride far more comfortably. In fact, the Q30 is probably the best riding car in its class. Now while the steering is pinpoint sharp and accurate, the Q30 does suffer from a lot of body roll. But in actual fact, that's a good thing because it's a refreshing change from the trend to have premium hatchbacks riding really hard. Now what's not quite so good is the price of some of the top spec cars in the Q30 range. Now you can check out the full prices on carbuyer.co.uk, but this car with a few options is over £35,000 and that's an awful lot of money. Now if you stick to lower down in the range, the Q30 is actually quite tempting. Now it would be easy to dismiss the Q30 as yet another Infiniti that's way off the mark compared to the likes of BMW, Audi, Mercedes and Volvo. But the Q30 makes a credible case for consideration. It's interesting to look at, nicely made and has a certain cachet about it. Now if you're in the market for buying one, you need to check out its rivals, and you can do so by clicking the video on the left for our review of the BMW 1 Series or the video on the right for our review of the Audi A3. Click up there for our latest video and on our logo to subscribe.